everybody. Welcome to the most interesting panel of the full conference. I can say with some distance, first of all, because I did not participate in the study. No, I participated in this study. I was one of the researchers together under the supervision, actually, of Kristie, together with kids, and together with many of you around these chairs and this room. And now we'll start really. Good morning again. It's an interesting panel. I'm very proud of this panel because I think it's the first time that we focus on credit scoring and CPDP, and I think that is quite an emerging topic. So there's a lot of debate about big data, profiling, risk assessment, and so on going on. And actually, credit scoring is one of the most commonly used example of big data profiling. So in this panel, we'll focus on at least 3 different case studies, and Kristie will provide a little bit of an idea of what we have done across country in Europe. So you will have a presentation focusing mostly on the case of Norway, which is a very interesting case, I will assure you. Hågen, who works at the Data Protection Authority of Norway, but he will introduce briefly himself. We will have a presentation focusing on UK by kids. We will have a presentation by Julia, working on from Epic, working on the US case, and then Kristie will provide a more broader overview of what are the issues at stake and our main funding from the IRIS project, which was the overall framework 7 project funded by the youth that provided the funding and the occasion for carrying on these studies. But the first thing that I have to say, we had a lot of discussion about credit scoring in the past with the crisis, but most of this discussion focused on the credit scoring of states or big companies. Here we focus on a slightly different understanding of credit scoring on individual. This is really an overlooked topic even in social science research. So this was a quite exploratory work, I would say, and so we are very, very proud of presenting the first result. So I give the floor to Hågen. Each of us has around 10 to 12 minutes to make a presentation, and then you will have time to have a question and answer.
Good morning. Nice to see many faces here. My name is Ljøgodt. I come from the Norwegian DBA, Stockholm actually. I've been working with credit scoring and banks and insurance companies for the last few years in the Norwegian DBA. First of all, I want to thank you to Rocco for inviting me. Due to that, my boss couldn't say no when I said I want to attend this conference. So I'm happy to be here. I'm going to be talking about the Norwegian legislation on this field, which, according to Rocco, is quite special. So that things. In Norway, we have in the personal data regulations, we find an own chapter just dealing with the credit score. The regulation also protects legal bodies, because we're going to focus on natural bodies today. Credit scoring is it's a part of the big data and automated decision discussion. I think credit scoring is interesting, yes, because the decisions has great impact on your life. If you're able to have a rental apartment or buy yourself a new car or whatever, credit score is great importance. I'm going to just go through some highlights from chapter in the personal data regulations. One of the key questions is the data subject's right to access to their own personal data. Of course, it's important to know the basis of the decision made about it. Every time company asks for your credit information, credit information company also has to send you a duplicate of the scoring to inform you what kind of data is being revealed, and also give you the opportunity to correct any errors. It's also very important. And you can also ask for a credit scoring company to give you information for the processing of the data during the last 6 months. And the reason behind this, the right to this duplicate, it's not only to give you access to your own personal data, which is important from a privacy standpoint, but also it is also have this effect that it's a way to detect any attempted ID theft or fraud, because someone someone wants to take up a loan in your name, then you will be aware of that. That may be the most important. We've seen a lot of examples. We've seen this duplicate, and then you have the opportunity to prevent that ID theft from continuing. Also, an important rule in that data regulations is that before you can start a credit scoring company, you have to get a license from the DPA. And this standard license give us the opportunity to set our own requirements when we find that necessary in order to protect privacy. These conditions can go even further than the law and the regulations. The license contains a full list of what kind of personal data the credit scoring company can collect, and also from which sources. So we don't have to have a discussion with the companies what kind of data is relevant, because we have a discussion, but in the end it's up to us to make that decision. And when we worked out this standard license, we also looked at the consumer rights and also the social aspects when it comes to credit scoring and the impact credit scoring has on people's life. And I guess I have to admit that kind of outside our mandate to take such interests. But well, no one has objected it so far, so we think that's well, great importance anyway. No, sorry. We got to go one back.
Well, we like that. Sorry. But
requirements for the standard license. If there is a dispute whether or not an unpaid claim is valid or not, data regarding this claim cannot be registered by the credit score company. And as a main rule, it is the debtor's opinion which is decisive for what kind of claims that is valid. Of course, if that opinion seems totally reasonable, it's not up to the debtor alone. That's the main rule. And also, when a claim is paid, the credit score companies have to delete any data regarding that claim immediately. And even though I guess it's hard to disagree that that kind of data still will be relevant, even though the debt is paid. As we see it, people should have the opportunity to get a fresh start and pay this claim. And also, it works as an initiative to pay your debt. When that's done, have a clean sheets and a fresh start. I never mentioned some of the cases, difficult questions we have to sort out during the last 2 years. The insurance companies' use of credit scoring has been a case, several cases, and insurance companies cannot use credit score to determine the risk or the size of the premium, the price of the insurance. And I guess a lot of credit information are proved to be relevant when calculating risk or credit score. They are still not allowed to be used for that purpose, even though they're relevant. For instance, how many times you have changed your address during the last years? For some reason, that says a lot about your credit score, but even still, not allowed to use that kind of data. And also, how many times you've been, someone has asked for your credit score. It's relevant, but not allowed to use it. And also, employers' use of credit score has been several cases of that issue as well. Employers' use of credit score about potential employees. The main rule is that they are not allowed to collect credit score or credit rating information at all. One exception is when hiring employees with a great economic responsibility. And then you can only collect credit score information about the candidates that you are most likely to get the job. And I'll also mention again home rental services. Is it acceptable to collect credit information when you rent out an apartment? And our practice says that professional rental services are not allowed to collect credit information. But as a private person, if you want to rent out your second home or something, we see the risk to be higher for a private person. So they are allowed to collect credit information. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think we'll come back with some questions because there is much more, but probably will come also through the comparative angle. Kristie.
Good morning. I'm going to be talking about credit scoring in the UK context in relation to some of the work we did with the Iris project. And for me, the starting point, or what's credit scoring to me, is it's an example of profiling, or as Lauren would have it, social sorting par excellence. how it categorises people, how it segments people, and how it limits some of their choices, and how it opens the doors for some of those other choices. And what kind of Holmes, what do I think about a little bit, well, what I was thinking about a little bit when I was writing this, was Leeson and Tritt. They talk about information asymmetry. And what they refer to here is, in the good old days, the bank manager or the building society, whoever was loaning money or loaning credit, they had a working relationship generally with their customer and who they were giving this credit to. With the advent of the digital age, there's a certain amount of distances involved. So credit referencing agencies kind of fit the middle ground, where they're the people who the loaners, the banks, building societies can turn to see how trustworthy these people are and the likelihood of those repayments being made. So it's this asymmetry that I want to play around with a little bit today. So in the UK, there's three main credit referencing agencies. There's Call Credit, Experian, and Equifax. And what they generally do is they use algorithms that work off databases, various different databases, and they come up with scores. And they also do things like use National Hunt Checker, or National Hunt Record, which what that does is it looks through previous applications and it looks for consistency within those applications. So if you say your income is 6 million in one and 6 million in the other, it's going to show up a red flag there. And what they do, and there's, it's not all algorithmic. There is, a kind of a personal or a person input as well. And what they do is they provide a score, and the score usually is 0 to 999. Somewhere around 500 mark is where you want to be. That's what will guarantee you a loan. It depends on the product, it depends on your circumstances, but that figure can move around, but it's generally around the 500 mark. And how they work and how they classify. And as luck would have it, during the research process, what fell into our laps was this. And this is called Mosaic. You can have a look at it afterwards if you so wish. Mosaic is from Experian. Mosaic is their product they have. And this is what they want to do with Mosaic. Basically, is provide an accurate understanding of the demographics, lifestyles, and behaviours of all individuals and households in the UK. And what they've done is they've broken down 15 different categories. And within these categories, we have the top category, which is A, which is the alpha, and we have peers and imaging, and 3.54 of UK households are these type of people. Peers and imaging are young, upwardly mobile, lots of disposable income, and then it goes down to more today, middle-aged couple, happy family, retired couple, probably with disposable income as well, and then it goes right down to the next one. The bottom end of the spectrum, which is the claimant cultures, those who are seeking government benefits, and these grey paragraphs in the lead, you probably can't read it on this, they detail exactly what people are. So in the case of Group J, they suggest that they spend a lot of their money on betting, on alcohol, poor quality foods, don't have their own mode of transport, and so on. And these are some of the pieces of information they're using in making these calculations. Okay? So hopefully these will just go through. So before I move on to some of the findings, these are images. When you simply Google credit scoring, these are some of the images that came up, and I'm just going to flick around hopefully in the background to give you an idea of people's interpretations of what credit scoring is. So from the findings, two main points I want to take out from the findings. And the first point is transparency, or the lack of transparency. And within these organisations, there's a certain amount of secrecy, which is understandable, particularly with trade secrets and what have you. But there's also a certain amount of non-transparency in what's happening to this information, how it's being collected, how it's being collated, how it's being analysed, and indeed how it's being sold. And in the UK at the moment, there's a man called Ljøgodt who's leading a campaign calling for an in-depth inquiry into what the credit reference agencies are actually doing. And his story emanates from the fact that he had a commercial dispute with another party, and the other party hired some lawyers. So those lawyers then accessed his credit score and the credit referencing agency's information held on him. And their argument was they were just verifying that he had enough income to pay for the case that he lost. His argument then is that he must be notified, or he must give permission to those third parties if they're looking at his information. He was never asked for his permission. And so he's pushing for this call for greater transparency in what's happening. And this ties in as well with an interview I did with a private detective. And the private detective suggested that once he's given a client or once he's given a project, the first port of call he goes to is the electoral roll to make sure the person is who they are and where they live. The second place he goes to is the credit reference agencies. Now, one of the big hindrances is it's extremely expensive to get one of these licenses, and you need a digital footprint. And indeed, that's how the lawyers were caught by this guy, Bev Oates. He had a look at his information and he could see who was looking at it, and that's why I got something from him. The second point I want to make is, in relation to profiling, this is one of the few instances where there's scope for a fight back, or scope to play the system yourself. And this revolves around another interview I had. And this was with a chap who was born in Eastern Europe, who had an unusual sounding name in a UK context, which I'll come back to. Moved to Canada, naturalised Canadian, moved to the UK about 20 years ago. About 10 years ago, he had a rather healthy bank balance, or so he thought. He went in to buy into a furniture shop. He wanted to buy a sofa. He picked out the sofa he wanted. He didn't have enough to buy it outright, so he decided to use the in-house credit system. He signed the paperwork, it was sent off. About a week or so later, came back, and he was refused. He was red with rage. He couldn't understand why he was turned down for credit. So what he did then, and I quote, is he turned to his online sources. I just Googled stuff. If you go to any of those compare online sites, they usually have a bit of an indicator of what's been taken into consideration. So, voters register, previous credit history, and other things, which I did was stop applying for credit. So if I get any offers, we'll give you that credit card, I don't do it. I go strictly to the people whom I already have a history with, and interrogate them and convince them to the kind of stuff that we have. When you go to a lot of these compare online sites, they usually give you 10 points or a pointer system of what to do. And this is exactly what he did. So he went to a lot of these places, he checked out his surname, it was misspelled in a number of places, he corrected the spelling of his surname. He had also had a dispute with a mobile phone company, he sorted that out, he got onto the voter register, he stopped applying for credit as he suggested, because the more often you apply in a short distance, your score drops. He also got a new permanent job, and hey presto, he got his credit. So when reflecting upon this is what he suggested. You can play the system. You play to advantage. Facebook. So let me use that as a metaphor. I think we all, to a certain degree, paint a certain image of ourselves that we're comfortable with and that we want to portray. It's a certain alter ego. Well, I want to have a credit scoring agency and a financial institution's alter ego, which allows me to have more freedom and choice. I don't really give a shit what they think about me. I give a shit about how I can influence their decision making and have more freedom. So this is how he played the system, and this is how he reflected upon what happened with him. So to offer some sort of conclusory remarks in this, I think what emanates from the findings we made was the 2 points mentioned. The first one was the lack of transparency in what's going on. The lack of transparency in what information has been collected, how it's being used, and who it's been sold to those third parties. And a recent report in the UK suggests that 7 million people annually are refused credit. Of those 7 million, a large proportion of them don't realise they're being credit scored. In fact, some of them don't even realise what credit scoring is. So there definitely is a call there to bring that out into the public domain. And lastly then is this opportunity of fighting back, or playing the system to your advantage, of using the knowledges that are out there, using the fact that you're aware that you are being credit scored, and playing by their rules to some degree. And I'm not naive enough to suggest that the symmetry that I started with should be balanced. The lender will always need guarantees, and I think that's almost sacrosanct, to make sure that some of those repayments are made. But I think what is needed is much clearer overview of exactly what's going on and who's controlling the information and who it's being served to. And I'll use it.
Thank you very much, Keith. Julia. Try to open your
Well, my presentation session is opening. I'm Julia Horwitz. I work for the Electronic Privacy Information Center, or EPIC, in Washington, D.C. I'm a consumer protection lawyer. So I have actually kind of a lot of slides. So
But I'm very quick in passing through some.
So, and my presentation, I think, is going to follow largely the 3 questions that are listed in the program. What are the main practices and main purposes of credit scoring? What are the most relevant legal frameworks? And what are the key controversies surrounding credit scoring? So I'm going to, I guess, start right off with part 1. What are the main practices and purposes? How does it work? So a U.S. credit score is a number, I'm sure similar to the UK sort of credit score, except that 500 is probably not the number that you're aiming for. The number is generally between 300 and 850, and I think you're aiming for a little over 600 at the lowest. The number is assigned to you by a private credit scoring agency for the purposes of many of the American legal regimes. These companies are referred to as consumer reporting agencies, or CRAs. But the word agency is tricky, and I find it a little slippery because an agency is also a federal executive office in the United States. So it's important to keep in mind this is not a government assigned number; it's a private company. And as everywhere, a credit score rates how risky a borrower you are. The higher your score, the less risk you pose. So there are several methods for calculating credit scores in the United States, although they are proprietary. So it's the intellectual property of the private companies, so they claim, which methods they use to determine an individual's credit score. The most commonly used method, and the one that's been adopted by, as far as I can tell, the most major credit scoring companies is called FICO, which came from a company called Fair Isaac & Company. But FICO is used by many of the biggest credit scoring agencies. And a FICO score, after lots of pressure and many years of people telling FICO and other agencies we are confused, what goes into a credit score, they offer this vague breakdown, although there are many factors that go into each of these subcategories, so don't be fooled, this isn't the complete picture. But about 35% of your score is your payment history, so if you pay your bills, how promptly, any late bills, any bankruptcies. About 30% speaks to your outstanding debt. 15% is the length of time you've had credit, so if you pay off your balance every month, that's part of a score. If you have outstanding credit for months on end, that's part of the score. 10% is new credit, both how much and how frequently you open new lines of credit. And then another 10% is the types of credit you already have. So this both means the kinds of things that you have invested in, like a home or a car, but also the repayment or the credit plans. So this is the slide. I think I preempted my last slide with that caveat, which is that those are 5 factors or 5 broad categories. They're not comprehensive lists of factors because there are, we understand, hundreds of sub-factors that go into these. So the 3 national U.S. credit reporting companies are Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. There are many other sort of smaller specialty credit reporting companies that do, home loan credit reporting or auto loan credit reporting. There are just many subcategories, but for the purposes of an overview, these are the 3 main ones, and also for the purposes of a piece of legislation that I'm about to discuss. The people that can access your business report in the United States are any organizations with, quote, a legitimate business need. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this is vague enough that lots of time is spent by federal agencies in the United States and private claimants disputing what a legitimate business need is. but certainly they include things like insurance companies, landlords, credit card companies, state child support agencies, employers. They're I mentioned others. There are dozens of others. So to the extent that this is a regulated aspect of American life, these companies are governed by both federal and state laws. So that if it's a state sort of credit reporting agency, or even a national one, it has to comply with state laws. But at the minimum, here are the federal laws that govern all credit reporting. So those are the Fair Credit Reporting Act. That's the main one. It's called the FICRA, or the FCRA. The Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, or FACTA, which is it sort of did a very narrow thing, which I'll discuss. The Fair Credit Billing Act, and something called Regulation B. So first I'm going to go over FICRA, which is the main sort of thing that governs credit reporting in the United States. This is the law that identified those credit scoring companies as CRAs, consumer reporting agencies. And a lot of what FICRA does is assigns obligations to CRAs, although in many opinions, in my opinion, not enough. And sort of nominal duties or nominal obligations, but not enough. So, for example, subject to certain procedures and subject to paying some money, a CRA has the duty to provide a customer with his or her credit score or credit report. There's a duty to notify customers about negative information that is being not put into the report for the first time, but information that was once taken out and is now being reinserted. And then there are some sort of statutes of limitations within the FICRA about bad information. So usually if a piece of bad information that has been corrected is in the report for 7 to 10 years, somewhere in that range, it can be expunged. It has the right to be forgotten. It was a weak joke. It did not get a laugh.
Serious business.
It's a serious business. The FICRA also assigns duties to creditors, which are different than the credit reporting agencies, different than the CRAs. So the creditors are the people that feed the information to the CRAs. Those will include the lenders themselves, the banks themselves, landlords, companies that have in-house credit programs, auto lenders, I guess the third main thing that the FICRA does is gives consumers private right of action, or allows the consumer to go to court for money damages for willful noncompliance of FICRA, which means that the consumer needs to prove that the CRA or the creditor not only didn't comply with FICRA, but meant not to comply with FICRA. So, good luck, right? And I'll go briefly through these three other laws, because while they're important, they're not quite as expansive. The Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act is FACTA. And the main function of FACTA was that it allowed consumers to get a free credit report from each of the three major national companies once a year for free. So 3 times a year you can see your credit report. The FCBA is it's sort of tangential, I think, to the sort of credit scoring issue, but it deals with the credit billing for accounts that are designated as credit accounts. So it gives the consumers a bunch of responsibilities when the consumer receives a credit bill, and then also gives the consumer the right to go dispute that with this kind of official claim. And then once the claim is filed, the burden shifts from the consumer to report onto the biller to take steps to mitigate the mistakes. Regulation B is sort of the Civil Rights Federal Credit Act. Lenders and creditors can discriminate based on all kinds of things, but not race, sex, age, national origin, marital status, or receiving public assistance. A lender or a creditor cannot ask about the marital status of someone who is I mean, not only cannot discriminate based on the results, but can't even ask about the marital status of someone applying for credit, or ask about plans to have children in the future. And then there are some reporting requirements about whether or not credit has been denied. The federal agencies that administer these laws are largely the Federal Trade Commission prior to 2010, which was the passage of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act. And after Dodd-Frank was passed in 2010, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was created, which is largely a credit and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So many of those responsibilities, excuse me, have either been passed to the Bureau or are being shared between the two agencies now. And also many states, since many states have their own credit scoring laws, whatever state congresses decide, however they decide to allocate that responsibility, states will have that as well.
To speed on the third part, maybe you want to choose one of the most interesting problems, and then we can go to the other problems and give us an answer. 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, how about I just shoot through the first two? Okay, subprime lending. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the concept of subprime lending. If you go to the second slide, the next slide. So, for example, somebody with a much lower credit score will have to pay a higher percent of the mortgage, and then, if you go to the next slide, this sort of ends up creating a cycle because paying a higher percentage on your mortgage will lower your credit score. And so if you have a lower credit score, then the next time you go for a loan, you have a worse credit score and get a higher percentage, and then that results in this sort of vicious cycle. So there's a subprime lending cycle. It's one of the drawbacks. I guess we can skip over this one. Inaccuracies in credit reporting is, I think, probably the biggest challenge that faces us. A 2004 study. So first, I was looking at a 1998 study that established that 30% of hold credit scores had inaccuracies, and I thought that sounds low. I'm surprised. And so I checked the 2004 study. Sure enough, almost 80% of credit reports contain mistakes. There's a further breakdown. Some of the mistakes seem innocuous, like the personal information is inaccurate, like your name is misspelled or you have the wrong birthday. And then some directly affect your credit score, like closed accounts are listed as open or debts are listed as unpaid. But one of the, I don't know what the next one is. Oh, so that's my last slide, so don't worry. One of the real risks with things like this 54% of inaccurate personal information, one of the real risks there is the risk of identity theft. Obviously, if somebody has a similar name or knows information about you and just asks for variations on your name, it's easy to have identity theft and identity stolen. It also facilitates things like people pretending to be entitled to your information for purposes that don't turn out to be legitimate business needs. Like there are a couple of notorious stalking cases in the United States, or credit sabotage. So.
Maybe we will ask you this question.
Okay, so I'm the moderator of this session. Do I stand?
Whatever.
Would you like to stand or sitting? Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the three speakers who came and shared their experience of both working with credit scoring within the legislation and around the legislation, as well as research on credit scoring. I think there's some interesting points made, and I'm just going to draw out a few common threads across each talk before then telling you about what we've done on the IRIS project and then opening up the questions. Actually, it's going to come as no surprise that the kind of issues we discovered on IRIS around credit scoring in different European countries certainly chime with some of the points made by the speakers today. So, starting with Hågen, I appreciated your thorough overview of the Norwegian legislation. I think that when we come to discuss the broader European context, we can really see the uniqueness of the approach in Norway and how it kind of views the whole risk around credit scoring in a very different way to the other systems we look at. The Norwegian system tends to focus on risks to the individual and prioritises the detection and mitigation of those risks, whereas I think in some of the other countries it's more around business risk and the organisational risk of dealing with kind of unknown individuals from the consumer world. Keith, I think you went in a very interesting direction conceptually, emphasising the role of the credit scoring agency as that middle ground, as the mediator between the business and organisation and the individual consumer. I think you made some very interesting points about how easy it is to manipulate and manage one's credit score, and it's interesting to contrast this point with what the other two speakers talked about. In Norway, very accessible system. In America, it seems to be quite difficult for the consumer to really take control of what is happening, and particularly given the errors that you spoke about, and the inaccuracies, was something that's quite critical to pay attention to there. So I learned a lot from Julia. I learned a lot about the different approaches in America, and the way in which credit scoring was governed there, and the different credit reporting act. But what I thought was interesting was the use of the word fair in the title of all those pieces of legislation. Key's presentation had a number of images of numbers attached to people, and I was glad to find out about the actual symbolic value of those credit scoring numbers from you, Julie, because I didn't understand that 600 was bad, or 500 was bad. I didn't sort of understand the range of that there. And you gave us a very interesting overview of the problems. So I think when it comes to looking at what this the IRIS project has picked up, I think risk, we did pick up that theme, and I think consumer awareness, we picked up that theme as well. But I think in relation to this panel, I just want to dwell on this point of transparency for a moment, because it's very clear that no credit scoring agencies, or people do credit scoring, actually agreed to participate in this panel. Not one of them would want to come and talk to us all about how they practice their credit scoring and how they perhaps are accountable to some of the legislative frameworks they're working within. But the origins of the sort of IRIS work on this was in work package 3. I'm just going to tell you about what we found, and then in 5 minutes, and just give you 5 minutes, and then we can have some questions. Because we looked at credit scoring practice, yes, in Norway and in the UK, but also in Italy, Hungary, and Austria. And some of you might wonder why credit scoring is treated as a surveillance practice in the IRIS project. And of course, it's a surveillance practice, as Keith explained, because it's a form of bureaucratic administration which relies on the gathering, analysis, and application of information to actually shape and manipulate what happens in a population and can delineate life chances. So that's why we view it as a surveillance practice. The case studies that we conducted focused specifically on the harms and the controversies which arise as a result of credit scoring, and each of the speakers has alluded to those in their talks. So interesting range of harms then. The first harm we uncovered was maladministration. So bad administration, mistakes in data, also a lack of redress and remedies for these things, and low consumer awareness of what to do. So that was the first thing. But we also uncovered some abuses of the credit scoring system, some malicious uses of it. So in Hungary, for example, which has a central debtors list, so you have a centralised credit scoring blacklist in Hungary, and it was found that, of course, people in divorce proceedings and all that kind of thing were entering their spouse's name on this credit blacklist and trying to wreck their lives. There was a really interesting case that came up in Austria, and everybody laughs when you hear this, but it's really horrible. Some of the court staff in the Austrian courts were going through the files of cases that came in, picking out the cases of bad debt and then selling that on to financial institutions, and they were picked up and roundly reprimanded for that one, so we ended up in prison. And of course, Keith then talked about the kind of exploitation that goes on in the UK. we have these hideous products in the UK called payday loans. And payday loans are when you get a loan on your payday, you're supposed to pay it back by the next payday, otherwise you are penalised with extortionate interest rates of like up to 2,000%. Now, instant credit scoring facilitates that product. So you can get an instant decision because of the instantaneity and the kind of automation of profiling around credit scoring. And of course, it's aimed at the low-income people, perhaps not that financially literate, and they end up in really big trouble. So the kind of patterns we spotted in IRIS were around things like low transparency, low consumer awareness, and the financial institutions perhaps not taking the regulatory power of data protection authorities that seriously. We did spot a difference in sort of financial customs and practice. So countries with very high availability of consumer credit as part of the consumer lifestyle, which was the UK and Norway, as opposed to the kind of less sort of credit-centred economies of Austria, Italy, and more sort of limited areas. But those countries had, in some respects, started to address some of the procedural and distributive justice issues around credit scoring. In the UK, it's actually quite easy to access your credit score, and there's advice available as to how you can manage it, like in media, and there's all kinds of adverts around it. Not available to everybody, but it is there. And I think one of the things, although we've had a good overview of the Norwegian system, I think one of the things I want to talk about, which I consider quite a triumph, is this realisation in the Norwegian guidelines that that even though you might have a perfect credit record, paid everything off, your credit score can change according to who you are, so where you live, what your gender is. And they kind of, and all kinds of other things, I think, Julie, you talked about as well in the American context. And I find that quite heartening that at least they're starting to recognise that this, as a surveillance system, as a method of social sorting, can actually have some detrimental effects for people. And within the regulatory guidelines, they can actually sort of advising people to be careful when they interpret scores. So that's really all I want to say about the IRIS work on this. I think it certainly chimes with what was said on the panel, and I'd just now like to hand it over to you for questions and discussion, because I'm sure there's lots of things that have cropped up. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Kristie, and I will take a few questions and then bring back to the table. Please.
Hi, my name is Hågen from the European Commission. Stand up or speak up?
Speak up.
Oh, speak up. Speak up is good. Thanks for the presentation, it's very successful and very good. I'm very surprised by not hearing about income. So apparently in all of these countries, the credits given to people depends on how much money they earn every month. I would expect that a prediction on the capacity of people to repay that would be a linear function of how much money they earn. If you earn 2,000 a year, or if you earn 20,000 a month, it makes a big difference in making repayments alongside what you've done in the previous years. So is that the case that there's no way of getting people's income into account? They do, and that they come out of the presentations. You say point, can you elaborate on the income?
Hi, Frank Hager from University. I was a little bit surprised to not having heard a lot about another aspect that was only mentioned by Kristie at the end, and that is the difference between causal relationships and statistical relationships getting into, or going into credit scores. So probably everyone agrees that if you have a bad record in paying back your loans, you shouldn't be surprised to not get another loan. However, and that's a causal relationship. However, in the age of big data, we see more and more systems that simply rely on statistical relationships. You are basically, you decided to live in the wrong neighborhood, or you decided to have a certain lifestyle, which has nothing to do from a causal perspective about whether you can pay back your loan or not. And being disadvantaged purely on statistical data, this is something I think where the legal system should really debate about. And it's not only credit scoring, it's going to happen in a lot of other areas.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes.
Yeah, maybe just as a bit of a follow-up to that. Keith, you said something in the presentation that people in your research told you that they were playing the system, gaming the system just to get their credit worthiness back on track. were people in your research actually aware of the fact that it's actually the other way around, that the system is playing them in order to comply to certain norms and standards that would indicate that I'm a good citizen and that I'm worthy of getting a credit. So this kind of Foucauldian self-disciplinary effect, I mean, are people actually talking about that, or do they have this limited perspective?
Thank you very much. I'll take also the other two also, and then we stop. I guess.
I was wondering to what extent how enforcement in the Norwegian situation, to what extent that those rules are actually enforced. Because it all sounds so wonderful, much better than, for example, the Netherlands. But it's a bit like Europe versus the United States. We have wonderful rules, but it's also partially enforced. So, I mean, yeah, so I'm less interested in enforcement than the actual rules themselves.
Okay, Frederick?
I was wondering whether you guys have a wish list to the lawmaker. Is anything missing?
Wish list who?
To the lawmaker. Do you have any wishes, like lawmakers should do A, B, C?
Recommendations. Yes. Okay. There are other two questions, so I will briefly come back to the table and open again. So please focus on short answers, so we have more rounds. Please, Julia.
Okay. Do you mind going back to Yes. I guess maybe the first thing I wanted to address was the question about causality, because I have at least a partial answer that I'm confident about, which is the statute that I mentioned that sort of listed the things that can't be considered as, I don't know, even as statistical proxies for other things. So in a big, in a purely big data environment, something like age, marital status, number of children might correlate statistically to certain creditworthiness, but that's explicitly illegal, making those kinds of links. And generally, the trend in American law is to think about the causality and not the correlation. Although, obviously there's no ignoring big data, and there's no pretending like it's not going to start creeping into the way that people interpret existing laws. So other than the things that are sort of explicitly illegal right now, I think that it's incumbent upon lawmakers to decide how much they would like to think about correlation as a good proxy for creditworthiness, and how much they'd like to think about it as a potential source of discrimination, unlawful discrimination, not economic discrimination. And then I wanted to go back to the FICO that had in percentages.
Ah, okay. Errors or
right. So I wanted to address the question of income too. And I didn't think so. So scores, at least to the extent that we understand what credit scores are about, they typically reflect the ability to repay a loan, and not the certainly the amount of the loan, but not the amount of income that goes toward the loan. So I think that credit scoring doesn't anticipate where the money is going to come from, but rather whether debts are paid and whether they're not paid. So it may well be that for something like this category of payment history, that where 35% of payment history is considered, that one of the factors turns out to be income. One of the hundreds of subcategories turns out to be income. But that's a sort of a level of information that the credit scoring agencies determine are proprietary, and whether or not your income is considered as part of their, intellectual property or business model. So another thing lawmakers might want to consider is transparency of the algorithm.
Okay, kids.
Yeah, the income question, that's probably one of the first places people go. There's all these other factors that feature as well. In the case that I used, he he had money in the bank, he was in a good financial position, but still was turned down for these other various reasons. So while it's an important factor, there's all these other factors as well that have a huge influence, and it's weighing up some of those balances, I suppose. The stats and the causal, brilliant. Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you 100%. And my issue is causal to some degree. Well, there's very little you can do about that, and it's understandable if somebody has shown that they can't repay debt, and that they probably won't in the future. But the statistical thing is the issue I have. By simply living in the wrong neighbourhood, that limits your options, which I see as fundamentally wrong. Or needs tweaking, certainly, thinking about this wish list. And yeah, brilliant as well. Yeah, the paying system. I think everybody knows that it's their game. If you want to be in it, you have to play their game. And as he talks about the quote, the alter ego. So that's what he's presenting to them, because he knows that in order to get what he wants to get, he has to tell them certain things and fine-tune some of those things, like his name is spelled right and so on. And I think people are aware, but not all. I think the people who play it well are the ones who are aware of it. The ones who are being rejected or turned down for credit are probably those that are unaware of it. And the top of my wish list would be greater transparency.
Yeah. I'll give some short answers to the questions. When it comes to income, I think in Norway, income is probably the key factor. Income and the size of your debt. Question about statistics, very interesting question. Due to this license system we have in Norway, we can say no to that, to the use of that kind of data. As I mentioned, your address and how many times you change your address might be relevant information based on statistics, but still can't use it for this purpose. And you mentioned possibility for the data subject to play the system. Because in Norway it's not that easy to play the system. But on the other hand, I think the system is better based on what you told me. The Marzec product and so on, I was a bit shocked at the question about law enforcement. My impression is that we don't receive that many complaints as we used to from the public on this field. I think maybe one of the reasons is that we have a constructive dialogue with some of few credit score companies in Norway, so it's easy to have this dialogue. I think also they all got an in-house data protection officer, which I think helps a lot. The last question regarding wish list. The cost of the license system kind of are the lawmaker in this field. Because the license, of course, the law has to be well, it has some boundaries to the law and regulation, but we can decide what kind of data the companies can enforce. That's it.
Before leaving the floor, I think that actually on the income is very interesting as a question, because, for example, in Norway, please correct me if I'm wrong, the credit scoring agency can access public registers, and in public register it's very easy to find what's the income. So in this case it's brought back, but this divarication between income and credit scoring, I think we can push a little bit. The nice instance that Matthias was mentioning of like it's your worthiness, it's not your ability to pay, which is like it's more like trying to give an assessment on the kind of person you are and how you are tuning with a system that is strongly based on credit, rather than if you're rich or poor, part of a different kind of class that you will discover by process. But I have a lot of questions myself, but I give precedence to the floor. 1, 2, 3. Mr. on the back was the first. So, no, you. Young guy.
Last year we did a lot of work with credit scoring, also in logging, and made some multiple works on that. I'm wondering about complaints. Have you had numbers of people who are complaining, or to FTC, or to companies, or to DPA maybe? Because we constantly hear this argument from the companies who are making credit scoring or also making debtors lists that people are not complaining, so everything is perfect. Although they say they have 300 complaints per month in Poland now, so they said still the number is very small comparing to the data set which they had. Do you have some numbers on that? It will be thanks for that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Finn Myrstad. I'm from the Norwegian Consumer Council, but it's not a question about Norway. I just found that I'm quite new to this field, so excuse me if I'm asking a question off topic. But you're talking about credit scoring and access to loans, etc. But you also mentioned Experian and a few other companies. And Julia, you mentioned that in the US it also being defined as consumer reporting agencies. And I just found that quite interesting because I'm just wondering to what degree in your analysis of these companies have you seen that this information is also used for complete other things, but direct marketing, for example. And Experian, you mentioned Mosaic, and I've been to some presentations by these companies, and they are doing marketing. And so I just wanted to ask about the relation they have to marketing and selling ads, connecting businesses to consumers, and of course then you have this issue of discrimination again, because they can target consumers with all kinds of products, differential pricing, etc., etc. And you mentioned 80% of information is wrong, so there's so much going on here. I'm just wondering if you can say a bit more about that and implications and how it fits into the discussion. And then the second question is with and how much they're involved with sort of collecting online information, offline, online collection points of information. I'm very curious. I know that there are 150 to 200 to maybe 1,000 collection points. I don't know. And are they involved in this, or are they getting information from other companies like Datatilsynet who are doing, online? You get the question. And then the second question is, how about foreign nationals? Because you talked about the UK, and since the borderless nature of the economy, how much do they have of foreign nationals, you think? My question is basically that if you have a great laws in Norway, but if information about Norwegian citizens, for example, in this case, are collected in the UK, and we want to buy a borderless service or product, we might also be discriminated, not be protected by the great Norwegian system.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Question?
My name is Stuart Dominguez. I work for an insurance company, and rather than a question, it's more a thought teaser. And the right controversial statement that fairness is actually against anti-discrimination laws. And by that I mean in the old days when I was in naturally, we could actually be using unilateral variable statistics where we could see that eventually a female driver was better than a male driver. And discrimination was appears to avoid that differentiation. Nevertheless, in the era of big data, we're actually able to start pricing according to each individual. If we're not able to use some of these factors, such as age, gender, etc., we actually going against the fairness principle, because poorer risks are being cross-subsidized by better risks, and the better risks then are not treated fairly. So we enter an area where the principle of solidarity that's around insurance and credit scoring is going against fairness.
Thank you very much. We were really hoping for this kind of questions, so they're very welcome. Any other question? Whatever, somebody else? Well, not that I don't like him, but he already asked the question. It's a question of fairness.
It's okay, Rocco, still up.
No, go ahead.
I was wondering, triggered by the question about income, to the extent to which credit scoring algorithms or the intensity of credit scoring actually reflects a mismatch between social norms about debts across the various cultures these issues are taking place. I think that might be an interesting research question. If you look for what the attitudes in the UK towards not paying debts are compared to Norway, Irish inflation, it might be a relationship there.
Okay, thank you very much. I will have my last question to everybody, and if it's no. It's 6 minutes.
Get off this.
We had a lot of troubles, and it seems that across the Irish members of the team in finding collective questioning of the credit score. Apparently, it's not a political issue in so far we expected. Like, do you have any case of classification or events in which it became a political issue? Somebody embodied it in a way or the other, or not? It's like very transversal question. So, again, Julia?
You might want to go to somebody else first. I'm trying to think.
Keith, what is yours?
Complaining, yes, there are complaints going in. I have no idea what the figures are. As far as I know, there's no literature out there detailing that, which I think is something that definitely needs to be looked at. You asked all the questions I've always been asking, direct marketing and so on and so forth. I've knocked on lots of doors. I've never been allowed in. They're exactly the questions that I've asked a lot of these companies. So my answer to that is I really don't know. Foreign nationals, they have, there's a certain, once again, kind of this tick box, so you would have to be on the voter register. So if it's in a UK bank, that's what they will insist on. They want to see a trail, a UK-based trail. I don't think where you've come from will really make that much of a difference, but you have to show a UK trail. The risk and fairness factors, a great point, I think. Yeah, absolutely. But you know, for me, there's a definite argument that you need the risks and the protections have to be brought into the conversation, and you have to have them there because people want to protect their assets. So that's entirely understandable. But my issue is the transparency with it, in that you're put into these sections, or you may be told you're a safe driver for certain reasons. But how do I know that? How have you made those calculations? And very rarely are those calculations actually given with it. And that's what my issue would be there. But I understand your point, and I think it's a very valid point, particularly from the position of the lender, shall we say. And attitudes to not paying, I think they do vary, of course. You know, judging from the research and when we compiled it all together, I do think it varies across Europe. I know in the UK that bankruptcy has a certain label attached to it, and if you're somebody who has been declared bankrupt, there's certain things that come with that, like you can't go onto a board for, I think it's 18 months or 2 years, and every time you go applying for new credit, that label sticks with you for a certain time period. I can't remember what it is. So within the UK, as all I can really speak for, there are certain tags or associations with bad credit that haunt you in our society.
Do you want to have a tiny comment in relation to the complaints issue? I don't have numbers, but what we did find on Iris, and this is from Chiara's area because she did the time case study, was a total lack of consumer awareness of their rights. And actually, going back to the wish list, I would like regulators to really seriously tackle consumer awareness of the credit score, its power, and to tackle companies who are denying subject access rights, making it very difficult for people to actually understand this thing that's really affecting their lives. So it's consumer education for me is the reason why complaints are. That's what I'll go back to my members.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just a few comments. The question regarding complaints. Of course, we have our challenges in Norway as well. Most of the complaints we're receiving regarding persons or companies who misuse their access to the credit score companies' registers. We have, of course, cases people credit scoring their ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend and so on in that level. I think one of the reasons we don't get that many complaints about credit scores is not showing the right picture and so on, is that the tel company or a bank, they want their customers, they want as many customers as they can. go to a bank and you won't get a loan because credit score is too low. If you explain your situation and have a reasonable explanation why the credit score is so low, I guess the bank will listen to you because that's how they make their money. You give people loans. I don't know if that's the explanation, but as I said, we don't get that many complaints as we used to. Remember the other questions?
I just wanted to touch briefly on the sort of price optimization question, for which I have two responses. One of I tend to disfavor that idea, and one of the main problems that I think about it is that is this access and transparency problem that's come up. So depending on how narrowly or how broadly you define your categories, you risk either sort of deliberately leaving out other factors, or you get so over-inclusive that you're sort of making your algorithms useless. So without the ability to really test the limits of the kind of subgroup that you're looking at and to have independent assessments of that as well, I think that's sort of an inherently flawed idea. But then the second one is sort of more of a general social policy sort of question, which is, we pay into, most of us I think in here, pay into systems that we use infrequently or very frequently, but differently than other people all the time. So we all pay taxes that go for building roads, maybe none of us drive. We all pay into Social Security or something equivalent for, I don't know, the care of old people, and maybe we'll all die before we're old. We don't know. So it seems that if we changed our policies across the board so that taxes were optimized and all the other ways that we interact with the world were optimized, that would be fair for insurance companies to do the same thing. But if only insurance companies get to benefit from this, then it seems like that's mostly a business interest and doesn't have consumers at heart at all.
Okay, I have to close the session because people are pushing on the door. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your